right, welcome everyone. My name is Nicole Donelson. I'm the Vice President of Philanthropic Strategies and Partnerships at the Central Florida Foundation. We're so excited to have you join us today for what is going to be an incredible discussion regarding education and post-secondary education and some of the barriers of both accessing as well as completing post-secondary education. We've got an amazing panel today, and it's going to be very informative. We would love for everyone who's listening today to feel free to take part in being a part of this conversation. We ask that you do so by using the Q&A at the bottom of the panel. You can select in there and enter in any of your questions. We'll try and do our best to address those towards the end of the call or as we can throughout the discussion. In addition, this call is being recorded and will be available later today or tomorrow for those who could not attend or those who want to watch on replay. For now, I'd like to hand it over to Mark Brewer, President and CEO of the Central Florida Foundation.
Thanks, Nicole, and good morning, everyone. It's good to have you here for another community conversation. We've had lots of people communicate with us over the last year or so coming out of the pandemic about the future of how we support and help people seeking an education. Now, that may seem broad, but the reality is during the pandemic, many things changed. People began to think differently about traditional scholarships and how they're applied, and think more about how we support students who are moving into an education and being able to keep them in that education. There's also a lot of thought about the kind of journey that people take and what it takes to support that. We have a fantastic panel today. Our panel is made up of a college president, an education foundation president, and an executive director at a scholarship organization that works directly with students, helping them make that journey into higher education. And so we thought that this would give a good kind of circle or thought process around not just where we've come from, but where we're going, because we are in dramatic change right now. And all of these women are really a part of that. So I want to introduce you to them so you know who they are. First, she is the CEO of the Pinellas Education Foundation. It's a coalition of business and community leaders who collaborate to improve the quality of public education. I had the pleasure to work with her when she was the president of the Florida Philanthropic Network, and she was also a vice president at the Helios Education Foundation. Please welcome Stacy Baier. Stacy, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Next, she's the president of Valencia College. Before being selected in a nationwide search as Valencia's 5th president, she was the campus president of the Osceola, Lake Nona, and Poinciana campuses at Valencia since 2010. She also served as executive vice president and provost at Valencia. As a first-generation college graduate, she is passionate about the role education can play in transforming lives of students and their families. We've been honored to work with her here at the Central Florida Foundation. She herself is a lifetime learner. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kathleen Plinske. Kathleen, welcome.
Good morning. Thanks so much for the invitation to be part of the conversation.
And she is the executive director at Support Our Scholars, a nonprofit organization that provides financial and emotional support to disadvantaged young women with extraordinary potential during their college journey. Prior to her role at Support Our Scholars, she worked at the Camaraderie Foundation and Easter Seals. Please join me in welcoming Samantha Sterthaus.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. So to kick us off in the discussion today, I want to start by hearing a little bit from each of you about your specific and particular roles. And I want to kind of take this in a kind of a normal process that might help the average person see how all the pieces of your puzzles fit together. If I can, I'd like to start with you, Kathleen, because as the 5th president at Valencia, you have a very broad vision about how to support your scholars and how to figure out what that journey of education looks like. And I'm particularly intrigued at your journey into things that have nothing to do with tuition and matriculation. You're really focused on what it takes to make a student successful. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey, what you're doing, and what you think.
Absolutely. I'm just feel so privileged to have the chance to lead Valencia College, which is an open access community college which is proud to admit the top 100% of all applicants. So, there's so much attention, I think, placed on selective institutions, and we're proud to be the exact opposite, which is we will admit and accept any student who is interested in continuing their learning. And we are committed to work with students where they are when they come to us. And one of the things that I have come to recognize is that through federal financial aid and other sources of funds, more than a third of our students actually pay nothing out of pocket in terms of tuition to attend Valencia. And that's extraordinary support, and I think makes higher education possible for so many of our students. And they face many challenges that can derail them from pursuing their goals. Oftentimes, as we say, life gets in the way. So whether it's a breakdown of a vehicle, whether it's loss of hours at a job, family responsibilities, there's something that is outside of the traditional cost of tuition and fees that might prevent our students from continuing their education. And at Valencia, we share this big idea, and it's really a beautiful big idea, that anyone can learn anything under the right conditions. And it is really at the core of our work to identify and create the conditions that our students need to be successful in their learning. And I think for many years, we really focused on what are those conditions that are necessary in the classroom in order for our students to be able to succeed. But in most recent years, and certainly during the pandemic, really expanded that vision, understanding that the conditions that our students need to be successful are some of those that expand beyond the classroom as well. So lots of wraparound types of support to ensure that our students are able to focus on their education, in addition to all of the challenges that they might be experiencing in their lives.
Thanks, Kathleen. So look, I'm particularly intrigued by the unintended consequences in a catastrophic phase of America, the pandemic, in us beginning to think about how do we open doors wider. Now, the difficulty is the system that we've all known for so long has really been built around a system of meritocracy, right? So the concept is, if I give you the opportunity to come and learn, then you're going to work hard, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you'll get over whatever things are in your way. That's all up to you, right? What we're supposed to do is provide the opportunity. And as Kathleen has just described, that's just the first step, not the last step. So Samantha, you are right on the front lines with people who have incredible opportunities, but it isn't always an easy path, and the challenges can be destructive. Tell us a little bit about what your organization does and how you deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we see a lot of what Kathleen just mentioned every day. We see our scholars have full funding, they have bright futures, they have incredible scholarships and amazing opportunities, as you said, Mark. And then something happens and it derails them and it gets in their way. And so we see right now, we at Supporter Scholars have 78 young women that we work with. We give them a $10,000 scholarship spread over 4 years, but more importantly, we give them a mentor that walks with them for all 4 years of their journey. And we see on this journey them run into things like their car broke down, they have family tragedies, and they struggle with budgeting and life and the things that we all struggle with even as adults. And they're doing it at 18 while also trying to go to school, many of them being the first in their family to go to school. So we give them a mentor that is we work with women, so we give them a woman that walks by their side and helps them learn how to create a budget, helps them when some of those tragedies or difficulties pop up, be able to navigate that without derailing their ability to focus on their education as well. But I think it's a much bigger issue, and without that support and guidance, we see that that's really something that derails our scholars. And they're not just scholars, they are people outside of the classroom as well. I think we focused for a really long time on making sure that they knew how to study and they had the resources in the classroom. But we at Supporter Scholars try to focus on the fact that they are also a person with an entire life outside of their classroom setting, that they can't just leave at the door. It affects how much they can focus and how well they can do in school as well.
So Samantha, I'm kind of intrigued that with that kind of a challenging mission, it's not like you can create a template and put every student into the template. Clearly, people are going to have a large number of different kinds of issues and problems that they face. How do you deal with that? What's your approach?
Yeah, flexibility is key. We really are about whatever they face, we'll work with them together. We have scholars that have come to us and needed help traveling home. They go to a school that's out of state and they couldn't figure out how to get home. We have scholars that have difficulty affording housing. We have some scholars that have full scholarships that cover their housing as well. So each is a completely unique case. And we have found in our system that we can't have rigid guidelines of we only give you this and that's it. We have to be flexible with them. And really build a relationship and stay in contact with them. And, you know, as their needs come up, we find ways to meet them and be flexible and think on our toes and innovate and see what we can do to help. But trying to force them into that box doesn't always work because, as you said, their needs are vastly different. And so we have to innovate and adapt and make sure our system is flexible enough to help them with whatever their needs may be, even if it's something that we hadn't anticipated.
I think it was about a decade ago that we at this foundation began to see the challenges of being able to provide a student with all the money they need and all the support and technology they need. And then a broken down car suddenly has them drop out of school, right? and the one thing that isn't in the scholarship package is how do we fix that broken down car unless we rethink the way we put that stuff together. So those are good thoughts. Stacy, it's good to see you. I am particularly intrigued by the fact that the state's education foundations are really the bridges between the private and public sector and the reality of education. And you're dealing with donors and institutional folks every day who have a perception of what educational assistance is or should be. And it's your challenging task to help them see a brighter light. Right.
Trying for sure. So first of all, thank you for putting me third because it's always so helpful to have two colleagues, insightful colleagues speak before me so I can just build off of the great entree. I think the common theme here is really recognizing that money isn't enough anymore and that we have to begin to broaden our thinking about how we can help students access. At the Pinellas Education Foundation, we are really in the access game. We try to look at things that we can be doing while students are under the purview of K through 12 education that will lead and contribute to success factors. FAFSA completion, for example, has to happen while they're still in high school, and then it continues on once they get to post-secondary. But, early on in our development, the foundation really began to hone in on, money and what else. And while we still have a lot of scholarship donors who are investing in the actual tuition and fees that students need, we're beginning to pair some of our activities sort of in that on-ramp to make sure that students are taking some of the necessary steps that are outside of the traditional scholarship pathway to ensure that they not only, graduate with scholarship dollars potentially or financial aid coming through grants and aid through the federal government, but they also have the other tools in their toolbox to be successful. And the complexities of post-secondary education have grown exponentially. I mean, we spend a lot of time talking about, how difficult, for example, FAFSA might be for some families to complete, but there's so many other factors that are going into a student's ultimate success that we in K-12 can really begin to impact even as early as middle school and, looking at ways that we can support students, that we can involve funders, educate them around research-based practices that are helping students to ultimately be successful in post-secondary. It's not enough. It doesn't happen in the senior year. It happens much earlier in that development of the student to become the scholar. I'll also say, I think one of the really positive developments in the 30 years or so that I've been working in around public education is this recognition that the pathway to post-secondary education probably looks more like a frog on a pond jumping around lily pads, and sometimes they're going forward and sometimes they're going backwards. But if we just, if we can help the students, sort of focus on what the end goal is and how they'll get there, we can support them in various ways kind of along that path. And it may be a scaffolding approach. We have a lot of students who start in career technical education pathways, but begin to see, hey, someday I want to own my own plumbing business. So, maybe they want to go get their AA degree in business. How do we sort of scaffold the skills and recognize that for all students, it's not, going straight from here to a university, that we can help guide students. There's various directions that they can go. And so putting those supports in place from our perspective early in K-12 to let them understand what all the pathways are that are possible. And there isn't just one direction to go. And then as Samantha and Dr. Plinske were mentioning, being recognizing that we need to be providing students various supports beyond just tuition and fees.
So Stacy, I'm particularly intrigued by the fact that you actually have a longer learning cycle with kids. So the transactional piece of getting somebody ready for higher education at the transactional moment when they're moving to it has always been a challenge, but you have the ability to touch people much lower in the cycle, right? Before they really are in a space where they probably think they need to be thinking about this. How's that work? What's it look like?
Yeah, it's truly multifaceted. I mean, it's one, we try to expand our services beyond just this student to school interaction and involve the families. So often, I even think about my own kids' pathway. I have one in college now. It just looks very different than it does. So, helping parents to understand what their roles are, but also working with teachers, counselors, and students around course progression. What are the right courses that students, need to be taking to set them up for the widest possible options. Giving early exposure. I'll be honest, as somebody who's worked in this field for a long time, and I was first generation in my family to go to college, I never really understood the value of you can't be it until you can see it. So the exposure to students who have done this, have gone on this pathway to see themselves, even sometimes we've had some great success with students with different learning challenges, seeing other students who overcame those challenges and were able to go on. Also exposing them, I think I knew of 5 jobs when I was in high school, and it was all the jobs I could see. I really didn't even understand what my parents did for a living, but they were in real estate, but that phrase meant nothing to me except they sold houses. So helping students understand the various pathways. We look at an electric, like a Duke Energy, and all we see are the linemen, but helping them understand all that makes those businesses run. So, I wanted to be a veterinarian, figured out I couldn't, I could pass all the classes, but I couldn't handle people who were neglecting their pets. But there were other ways I could, potentially be supportive. I could work at a humane society. There were other job pathways that would keep me connected to the things that I was passionate about. So we're trying at the Education Foundation to infuse, understanding course progression, some of the steps you can be taking early on around exposure, SAT and ACT, that's so much about practice, educating families, educating students, and providing the tools so that they can start on this journey a little bit easier. Because what we're finding is we can even take the highest achieving students who are going to have no problem getting into University of Florida, UNC Chapel Hill, maybe even Harvard. But if they don't have all these other conditions helping them along this pathway, oftentimes they will undermatch. They'll go to, or they won't go on the right pathway. And that's where we see students who pause out of school, who drop out of school, helping them to make those informed decisions as early and get that exposure as early as possible. That's something that the Education Foundation can uniquely do.
So, Stacy, I want to give some kudos to the Education Foundations, and I think everyone on the call knows this, but if you don't, every one of the 67 counties has a school foundation, and the school foundations are essentially mostly responsible for the huge growth in experiential education in K through 12. As teachers try to figure out how to get their students into places where they can get some experience other than just academics, the foundations have done a terrific job of creating those partnerships and relationships and helping to spur that forward. And that's part of that pathway preparation, I think, that you were talking about. So we certainly at this foundation appreciate all that work.
Thank you. We appreciate you raising it up.
Hey, I want to ask each of you, I'd like each of you to just talk for a minute about your vision of a generic word, and that would be innovation. So on your watch, what does innovation look like? What is it you're doing, or what is it you think you have to do? Because we are in a really unique time in American history where public education is in a shroud of politics right now. There's a shroud of politics around much of education right now. And so the ability to stay focused on moving the outcomes that we need to move to keep education a critical part of American democracy is going to require some innovative approaches that don't look like what we've always done. And so I would just be interested to know your vision of what on your watch looks like innovation, whether you're doing it or you think you have to do it or you're just pondering it right now. What's that look like? And I'd love to hear from all three of you. Samantha, you're open, so why don't you go first?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, innovation looks like openness. I mean, you just used the word, but openness and flexibility. We're finding that with our scholars, their issues change. Even I was in school not that long ago, and I was also a first generation student. I graduated college in 2015. Even in that short amount of time, the issues our scholars face are different than the issues that I face. So for me, we're looking at innovation in the sense of just being open to whatever a challenge is for them. It's something we need to face, even if it's something that I don't understand. It's not something that was an issue I imagined facing. If it's an issue for them, we want to be open to facing it. And for us, innovation is also how can we solve their problems and give them autonomy over it. So with our scholarship, we don't give them any guidelines on how they need to spend it. They get money deposited into their account each semester, and it's up to them how they want to use it. If they want to use it to go to the football game, great. We want them to do that because social belonging is important and helps them stay in school. And so for us, innovation is really allowing scholars to lead the way. We want them to tell us what they need, what problems they need to be solved, and then we want them to take the lead on how they make their college experience impactful for them. So I think innovation is really about just being open to whatever needs to happen and making it happen.
Great. Kathleen?
I think for me, innovation really means thinking about how to ensure that higher education maintains its relevance and in the context of changing expectations, both by employers as well as by students. And I think the pandemic was a moment in time where it would be a mistake to wish that we could go back to the way things were prior to the pandemic. I think that our students and our society's expectations have changed. And I think an effort to go back to where we were, which frankly wasn't serving all of our students particularly well, would be a missed opportunity. And one of the things that we learned during the pandemic, we actually reached out on a personal basis to every one of our students who was going to have a face-to-face course converted online. And for us, that number was 36,000 students. And we actually wondered, did we have the capacity to make 36,000 phone calls? And did the math, and thanks to just an amazing team of faculty and staff, we were able to reach out individually to every one of those students and ask them what it was that they needed. And this was, this was March 2020, so right in the middle of it. And of course, we were expecting all sorts of concerns about technology and about the need for hotspots and about the need for laptops. And yes, we heard those things. But what we heard that we weren't expecting was a fear of losing personal connection and personal contact. And students fear that they would become disconnected with their professors and with their peers in the class. And so for us, innovation is how do we respond to the expectations of ways to use technology to make things that perhaps could be more convenient. So some of our processes that perhaps aren't core to learning, but at the same time, how do we leverage both in-person and online experiences to ensure that our students are feeling an authentic sense of connection and authentic sense of belonging at Valencia?
Good. Stacy?
Yeah, I love what you said about that personal connection. What we know about K-12 education is students don't drop out of school because they're failing. And I think that's what a lot of people think. They drop out of school because they don't have that connection to a person. And so when we think about persistence in post-secondary education or even persistence in K-12, having that person that's looking out for them or that they feel a connection to is so vital. So I applaud you for those efforts. I can't even imagine. I'm sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, that's a ton, but congratulations to your team who came together around that. So one of our belief statements or values is in around spurring on innovation. And as I think about the question and some of the answers prior, that piece about sort of being responsive to where students are. So none of my comments are going to like blow us out of the water, but some of the innovations that we have seen, and I think philanthropy can play an interesting role, is what gaps aren't being addressed, or what new approaches do we need to try out to see, is there a way that we can systemize them, for lack of a better word, where can we add some attention? So for a whole body of students, for example, in Pinellas County schools, there's a decent amount of kids who start the 9th grade and have a really good idea of where they want to end up. And then there's a whole body of kids who about this time of their senior year, they're like, holy smokes, what am I going to do next? But the reality is scholarship deadlines are passed. The opportunity for these kids who sort of wake up late, and I have 3 boys, so I know what that sort of looks like. There's a little bit later, we were able to recently create a scholarship that the application period is right now. And the application is really for those kids who are just trying to get that jump start into their post-secondary ed. They missed, maybe they're, they wouldn't necessarily have risen to attention around a merit-based scholarship, but they, are trying to figure out what that life pathway looks like after. So getting creative, even around the timeline of when scholarships are typically being awarded, being creative around the profile of the student that we're trying to go after with these scholarships. We have found that, there's real interest we all know that kids need to have some sort of post-secondary education to thrive and survive in this economy. And, but for some, the traditional timelines haven't always fit for them. So, that's one way that we are trying to innovate, and my colleagues across the state and other education foundations are trying to innovate, is even just disrupting the timeline of when most people are thinking about awarding scholarships.
It's excellent. I think one of the things that we wrestle with constantly is the lack of the private sector's ability to look at education as a system rather than a bunch of transactions and crises, right? So if you just for a minute create a continuum where you've got birth to 5, K through 12, state college, perhaps technical training, then university, and then you wrap in career source on the other side because they're doing all the after your job's gone retraining on the other side. If you look at that as a system and try to figure out how to make the system work better, then some of the crises that we spend so much time worried about, and you figure out that 3rd grade reading skills are likely a problem of birth to 5 brain development. You figure out that high school graduation can have something to do with 3rd grade reading skills, right? So rather than dropping in with a parachute into everything in the system that isn't working at any given moment, creating a system that actually produces people who will stay in the community, be happy, and be employable at the other end. And then having employers have the opportunity to figure out not what job skills do I need, but what skill sets will I need? What kinds of human skill sets are necessary to do the work in the future? Because job skills are going to change pretty much every year. And so we kind of feel like we need some innovation in the system, and all of you are doing the innovative stuff along that continuum that's really important. I think we just need to get the private sector to think about the system and stop parachuting into the crises one at a time, trying to figure out how to solve them.
I'd also say turning the, that I like what you emphasized. I'm going to call it, helping students and quite frankly, schools and colleges and universities to focus on competencies. Because if those jobs are going away, how can we help students, scholars articulate what competencies it translates across all industries?
Okay.
But I would say that's a systems change that maybe philanthropy can help promote, the systems themselves. But that's going to be a critical transition that we will all need to make.
On the demand side, across Florida and across the country, the demand side is already beginning to change as employers move to skill-based employment and away from resume-based employment. And so you start thinking about all the people who may have been laid off during the pandemic, the jobs that they would typically go try to get with a resume of their experience in that kind of job were gone, but the skills they had could be applied across industries. So if the employers start to think about skill-based employment and stop thinking that everything has to be resume-based and you have to have some set degree and so many years experience to do the job, then that empowers education in that system, I think, to do a better job. And you guys are certainly making that work. I want to give you an opportunity, and this is just any or all of you, I want to give you an opportunity to think for a minute about what you need from communities of investment. So I'm not going to call them donors because we don't call them donors at the Central Florida Foundation. People who make educational charitable investments are investing in the system we've just been talking about. And you've got many investors on this call. So the first thing that I would ask of all of you is that from your seat, from your perspective, what would you ask investors to be thinking about that might not have been something they thought about in the past? Because investors can be transactional, which is part of the reason the scholarship process takes time to change. Because if all I know is tuition and books and technology, then that may be my thought as the only thing I need to do to help. But investors need to think differently as the system changes. So just from your perspectives, what would you say to investors now? What would you want them to be thinking about? What would you want them to be asking you about? What kind of conversations would you want to be having with them?
Samantha and we're all three off mute.
Yeah.
Let's go first.
Dive in, make it a conversation.
I think on our end, we are starting to have conversations about post-COVID and what does life look like as students go back into a university setting in person, especially surrounding housing. So I would say for us, it's investors opening their mind past that traditional books and tuition into all of the expenses that a person has: housing, food, meal plans, travel, medical. Those are all things that our scholars are seeking support with. And for us, 94% of our scholars graduate with a degree, which is much higher than the national average. But those 6% that do drop out, it's almost always been tied to not being able to afford housing. And I don't think that's going to change in this current market. So I would say, like, that's probably our biggest challenge is how can we, with the help of investors, support them outside of the classroom and the typical school expenses. As you know, the world around us is changing. Have you seen the price of a dozen eggs recently? It's crazy. So I think those things affect us. And I would challenge investors to think of students like them as well, because they affect our students too.
So Kathleen, just to build off of that, you are actually building infrastructure around spaces, and not just around housing. There are other things, but you've identified a bunch of things that students actually need that they shouldn't have to leave campus for, and you're trying to figure out how to build that infrastructure and connect it. Is that something investors are talking to you about or willing to talk to you about?
Absolutely. And I do think that, you know, my hope and wish would be that investors would be open to those conversations, and perhaps not come with a predetermined methodology for supporting students, but allowing us to share really what we have learned from our students. It's been such a joy to engage our students in the conversation so that we can better understand the conditions that they need in order to be successful and not make assumptions based on our experiences. So just by way of example, one of the things that we learned from our students through a poll was that 40% of students reported experiencing food insecurity so severe that they were unable to purchase adequate amounts of food at the same time that they're trying to go to school. And one of our faculty shared that she had just sort of a heart-wrenching conversation with a student who the student said, "Do you know what the biggest difference is between high school and college? In high school, I got lunch." And you think about a student who's hungry and also trying to learn algebra, like that's just not, those are not the conditions that support success. So we have engaged with foundations to really look at how we might address food insecurity in particular, and not through trying to develop sort of a traditional non-perishable food item pantry, but also how can we get produce. And I think so much of this is how can we engage with our local partners who have real expertise. So in our case, Second Harvest Food Bank is the place to go for addressing food insecurity. So how can we partner best with Second Harvest, not trying to recreate what they do, but really leveraging the services that they provide and how to make those more accessible to our students. In a similar way, we have committed to partnering with Links to ensure that every one of our students has unlimited access to public transportation. So with a Valencia ID card, our students have free access to public transportation in Central Florida, which we have certainly heard is a key. And then I would also say that one of the funds that has been most powerful for us has simply been an emergency relief fund that our frontline staff have the ability to exercise their own professional judgment and make decisions about how to allocate those funds to students in the middle of a crisis. So of course, we had some experience with this during the pandemic, but then most recently during the hurricanes, the impact was disproportionate across Central Florida. And we had some students who lost everything. And we had students who were writing in saying that, that they had lost power for 3 days, so they lost their groceries for the week, and they didn't know how they were going to make it through the week without food. And so it was a tool for our frontline staff to be in a position to respond to those urgent crises where it's clearly an inflection point where that might be the moment that a student just drops out of college because the challenges outside of college have become too great.
So Stacy, you're the bridge. What's the investment in the bridge look like? And what do you want your investors to be thinking about?
Yeah, so the two words that came to mind for me when you asked the question was leverage and responsiveness. From a leverage perspective, where we can, in considering, I'll say, criteria or steps for accessing scholarships, where we can tie some of those to research-based strategies that we know lead students to actually move from acceptance to enrollment, I think that is helpful. FAFSA completion is one of those things. We know that research says that if students complete the FAFSA, they're more likely to actually enroll and start post-secondary education. So looking at places where we can tie the scholarship process to those kinds of activities. Another one that we really honed on, and quite frankly, it was a little bit at the direction of our superintendent, who was celebrating all the scholarships we were giving away, but our efforts weren't necessarily leveraging the largest scholarship opportunity in the state of Florida, which is Bright Futures. And so we have turned a lot of our attention and investment to not necessarily directly awarding scholarships, which we still do, but all of the things that are going to enhance the opportunity for students to actually qualify for this, for Bright Future scholarships, which is life-changing because it's multi-year. It has multiple different pathways you can go down, whether it's career technical education, going to a college, going to a university. So, being open that maybe as an investor, the end result is a scholarship, but it may not be the thing that the investor is funding. And then the last thing around responsiveness, and I maybe will have wished I held this answer for a little bit later on, is, the beauty sometimes of philanthropy is the ability to be responsive to needs that we couldn't have anticipated. And one of the things that we recently honed in on just this year is there's an unintended consequence recently to the expanded efforts around dual enrollment. So now students can dual enroll in career technical pathways at their public school run technical college. So in my community, it's called Pinellas Technical College. But the difference between dual enrolling at Valencia and dual enrolling in technical college is that a certification can't be finished in a semester. So you have to be committed to multiple semesters of enrollment in trying to attain a certification. And what we're finding in these few years that we've had this opportunity is students can't finish by the time they not all students can finish by the time they graduate from high school. And what the way the federal laws, the federal aid laws are written is if you have less than 600 hours to complete that certification, now you are no longer eligible for Pell, and which is a huge funding source for our low-income students. So here we have these kids who have already demonstrated an interest, a commitment, success in a career pathway, and they can't finish, without taking out loans or what. And the dollar amounts sometimes are relatively low compared to some of the things. And sometimes when we're making scholarship investments, we don't actually know, are the kids going to actually finish their pathway. At least in this instance, they've already demonstrated that and some success. So the responsiveness is now we have philanthropy stepping up to invest in these students, to say, hey, let us help you get across that finish line. For $300, $400, $900, we can help a kid complete something that they were able to start in high school. And I'm hoping eventually there is a legislative answer to this, because I know that's not what was intended. But in my district alone this year, I can tell you right now, we have 163 students that will not finish their technical certification. And so there was the ability, the nimbleness of investors, educational investors, to pivot and help solve this problem, hopefully for the short term until we can find a longer term solution. But it's going to help 163 more kids finish up their career pathway.
Well, I appreciate the systemic approach too, because that's really what we need to be thinking about, is how do you fix it for one child or 163 kids, but how do you keep this from happening again and again by resetting the system? That's good. I'd like to go around one time. We've got some questions piling up that have come in the ask side, and then there are probably some other questions that have popped up, which Nicole will be back to share with you. But I'd love to go around one time and just hear what you're working on in the next year or two that's most exciting to you right now. It doesn't have to be the most innovative thing. It doesn't have to be something that's brilliant. It doesn't even have to be something we've talked about. But I'd love to hear what you're working on that you're excited about, that you hope to make happen here in the next couple of years. Samantha, would you like to start?
I can start. Okay, I think the thing we're most excited about is that housing challenge that I just mentioned before. We have a few ideas we're kicking around. We don't have anything solid yet, but that's, I think, the most exciting thing for us moving forward. Is we're hoping to work with some of the universities and see if we can secure dorm rooms that we would fund for our scholars. We're hoping to work with real estate and maybe get houses that we can turn into scholarship housing. As you said, we're boots on the ground. So we are looking at ways that we can actively secure safe and affordable housing for our scholars, since we're seeing that as one of the biggest reasons they drop out. So I think that's what I'm most excited that we're working on, is some tangible solutions to the issue that we're seeing most affect our scholars and their dropout rates.
And I'm hoping, because you're not the only one trying to address that, I'm hoping that you'll be able to find some collaboration around the state, because there are lots of people looking at that problem, trying to figure out how to solve it right now. And it would be great to have a team.
Yes, exactly.
That's great. Stacy, how about you? What's most exciting?
I won't take up too much time because I feel like I might have covered it, but I think looking at some of these systems changes, like this dual enrollment crisis that we have, how can we help to inform the system so that we don't have to use scholarship dollars for this, but in the meantime using them, and then also that opportunity around additional leverage points and using research to inform how we might be able to help students access more scholarships by assisting them along the pathway in other ways that get them set up for success.
That's good. Kathleen?
I'm excited about just really the bold and ambitious goals that we have established for ourselves and for our students in our strategic impact plan. And I think what's exciting is that they speak across the ecosystem. So for example, one of our strategic goals is to increase the college going rate for high school graduates to at least 80% for students of each race and ethnicity in Orange and Osceola counties. That goal was established in partnership with both superintendents. And it's not a Valencia enrollment goal. It really is about how do we get more students engaged in post-secondary education. And that's only possible with partnerships through our education foundations, with community foundations, and in some instances, we're seeing our local government invest. So Osceola County, their commission invested to make an education at Valencia or Osceola Technical College completely no cost, no out-of-pocket cost to students. And that allows us to change the message, right? Because what I'm finding is that a lot of families, because of the media attention on the student debt crisis, believe that going to college is synonymous with going into debt. And it completely changes the conversation when we can start at a place of it's no out-of-pocket costs. Now let's talk about the other barriers that we might need to help you overcome. That is particularly exciting. And then I would also add that I'm excited about our accelerated skills training programs that really are designed to address the challenges that Stacy brought up. That we have programs that range in length from 4 weeks to the longest being 24 weeks to allow our students to complete industry certifications that prepare them for jobs that are in high demand and pay high wages in Central Florida. And if you were to attend a graduation ceremony, it's almost like you're attending the NFL draft, right? Like students have multiple job offers as they're leaving the graduation ceremony. And I just think there's something there that I believe we can learn from.
One of the things that always intrigues me about the work you do, Kathleen, is how many people go to class and already have a job. All they have to do is finish the certification, which clearly shows how important the demand is and how important it is in the system to be able to provide some just-in-time delivery for qualified people. That's good. That's good. I'm going to invite Nicole Donelson back because she's been monitoring all of the incoming questions, and she can summarize and put those together for us. Nicole?
Thank you. Thank you all. This has been a great discussion. And I know we may not get to all the questions that have been put out there. There was an earlier question because there was the discussion topic of life happens. And I know for us at the foundation, we talk a lot about the importance of data. And likely, in terms of looking at Valencia and the education foundations, you have a lot of the student data available. And so there was a question, can you leverage collective student data to help either predict or have an idea of, which students are at greatest potential need of intervention or support and kind of get ahead of that? How might you all use that kind of data currently?
So one of the investments that the Helios Foundation has made in Central Florida is the development of the Central Florida Educational Ecosystem Database. And it's anonymized data, but it's at the student unit record level. So we're actually able to use artificial intelligence, machine learning to look at hundreds of thousands of student records to see what classes they were taking in elementary school, middle school, high school, and then what was their pathway either directly to UCF or to Valencia and then to UCF. And from those data, we have been able to identify key indicators that predict whether or not a student is likely to, for example, have success at UCF after graduating from Valencia. And through those data, we're now able to develop essentially recommendations for what interventions might better support those students that are at the greatest risk of what we call transfer shock. So when you go from Valencia to UCF, that's obviously a pretty significant change in environment. And there are some pretty key indicators that suggest that a student might be more likely or less likely to experience that shock. And in partnership with UCF, we're working on developing and offering interventions for those students that the data suggests might need that additional level of support. And I think that, for us at our scale, it's impossible to imagine providing assistance in very personalized ways, perhaps to all 70,000 students. But if we could identify the 5,000 students that could perhaps benefit most from that type of intervention, I think that really allows us to focus our efforts to really yield the greatest good. There's some students who don't really need that additional support, but there certainly are some who would benefit most from that. And that's where we're really trying to focus our efforts and doing that based in the data that we see, along with the stories and feedback that our students share qualitatively with us as well.
That's great. Thank you. There was the discussion about start earlier, right? And Stacy, I know you mentioned that too, because in the space where you're at in K-12, there's the ability to have an impact in those earlier stages. And one of the points that was brought up is other factors that can impact, including ACEs and some of the external factors. Are there, is there anything that's kind of being done in collaboration in this space in connecting around some of these external factors that might impact a student's ability to progress towards the path of post-secondary education in order to kind of remove those barriers that may be there?
So I would say our foundation in particular is really in the early stages of pulling a lot of our efforts younger. We looked at data and, kindergarten students, for example, they start almost 50-50 boy girl. When you get up to high school graduation, it was more like 45-55. 55% of the graduating class was girls and 45% were boys. Then as we began to disaggregate the data, we've been a foundation that has spent a lot of time supporting students 30 plus years in that transition from high school to post-secondary education. And while we were doing efforts younger, we really had not pulled all the way down into elementary school until just a few years ago, because while probably many wiser people on this call have read all the research that says you have to start earlier, what our data was telling us, if students were not reading proficient by the time they ended third grade, only 14% of those students who didn't test proficient in the third grade would end up proficient by high school graduation. So it really reoriented our foundation to pull our efforts younger, knowing that the pipeline was getting narrowed very, very quickly. And then if you add to that, that college-going math pathways, with algebra being sort of the gatekeeper still around, do you finish algebra by the time you end eighth grade? The decision on whether you're on a college-going math track is made on your fourth or fifth grade math scores. So even in elementary school, where kids are headed, where they're being pushed, it is being decided so much earlier. So as we think about course progression and pathways, we did not feel that we could continue to stay up in high school and really only have our primary focus there, that we really needed to pull younger. When I read the question in the chat, they added, the person who posed the question added other outside factors lending into this. And just in full transparency, I don't think that we have, maybe in onesies and twosies examples, but not in a systemic way, have we started to look at that. We just recently pulled down into early ed, and we're beginning to peel back the onion to understand all the different places we need to be working.
I know that we're starting to get, we've got just a few more minutes. It's hard to try and pick not a favorite. Wanted to be able to also acknowledge there was a comment in terms of some of the programs that Heart of Florida United Way is also supporting, and that at Seminole State College. And I think, Dr. Plinske, you also touched on this sort of additional fund that allows for the ability to have faculty administrators identify more immediate needs of students to help address those factors, and that these sort of innovative approaches are beneficial. I've heard time and time again, individuals who are working within the education sphere mention that it can be a very small, what we consider maybe for many of us a small amount of a few $100s. That is what is keeping someone from moving beyond that place that they are at. And so I think it's beneficial for others to be able to hear what unique opportunities there are outside of thinking in a traditional way. Sam, I also appreciated the fact that you mentioned that even in the time that you have graduated, there's a change in what the college experience is. And we've addressed that too in terms of COVID and the pandemic and how that's shifted things. I had a conversation with my 9-year-old who I said the other day, now that COVID and the pandemic is over, how are you feeling about things? And her response was, is it? And so, we had a very real conversation about how are things different for her, even in elementary school, in the time that she remembered before that, which she does. Knowing that we just have a few minutes, would love to just hear any sort of closing thoughts, or if you want to take a look at the Q&A and kind of address a particular point within there, but to just be able to kind of hear from you of anything that we may not have had a chance to touch on.
I think one of the things as well that we're working with the Heart of Florida United Way on that's unique is providing students with a living stipend to make up for the opportunity cost of higher education. So our programs, the accelerated skills training programs, are designed really for those who might be trying to balance multiple part-time jobs and just barely make ends meet. And we can deliver that program at no cost to the student, but if it requires them to take 10 weeks away from work, the bills don't stop. Right. So that is another, I think, really unique way in which the Heart of Florida United Way has stepped into our work. And in closing, I'll just say I'm excited about our accelerated skills training programs because it provides the skills that students need to enter that career path. But what I am hearing from employers as well is, of course, the skills, but also employers won't say general education. But when I hear them talk about what they're looking for, someone who can think critically, someone who can communicate well, someone who can reason ethically, someone who can work with others and collaborate. That is the core, that is the essence of our general education curriculum. So I do think that traditional liberal arts education will always be a key factor in what employers are looking for. But what we're doing is sort of reversing the order, maybe get the job skills first so that you can get a full-time job with benefits, get set, and then have the opportunity to continue your education as you move into more of management and supervisory roles. And I think unbundling education so you can do those things and not have to wait 4 or 5 years to earn your degree to then get your first job is really what we're trying to do at Valencia.
Thank you, Kathleen.
We're short on time, so I can just give my final thoughts of I appreciate that this is the conversation that we're having and that, we can hear from incredible people like Dr. Plinske and like Stacy of what's going on at all different levels. And I appreciate that we are having the conversation about how do we fix the system and how do we encourage our students in all kinds of ways.
And just to add to that, the openness to begin to think creatively and the roles that philanthropy can play in leveraging some of these changes, just creating the open forum for us to have this dialogue is very much appreciated.
We appreciate all of you bringing this discussion, and I will say I share this with all of you. I have regular conversations with people who, personally would like to have an impact on education or a student's life, and their first place to go to is, I want to set up a traditional scholarship. And so having this as a resource to go back to and share in terms of thinking about what are the other ways that we might need to be thinking about in order to support these students to be successful is a great resource now for us to have as well. So thank you in being a part of that conversation. And thank you to all of our attendees today. We wish you a great day, and we have these community conversations quarterly, so keep an eye out for the next one. Thank you.